"Your brother is alive," the little street urchin declared to the millionaire, who believed he was an only child. Then she pointed to a man hidden in the alley, and as he approached, he uncovered a shocking truth. "Leave a comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is crucial. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help." The afternoon sun sliced through the streets of the sprawling metropolis as the 30-year-old widowed millionaire stepped onto the cracked asphalt of the inner city for the first time in his life. His perfectly manicured hands adjusted his Italian suit as he observed the dilapidated buildings that spread like scars across the urban landscape. The charity visit had been his PR team's idea, a calculated strategy to improve his public image after a series of exposés questioning his ruthless business tactics. The successful entrepreneur walked amongst the makeshift stalls of the impoverished neighborhood, handing out food baskets with the forced smile of someone fulfilling an obligation. His striking good looks drew the attention of the local women, who whispered comments about this matinee idol look-alike who seemed to have stepped straight off a movie screen. However, behind his piercing eyes lay only the desire to quickly finish this charade and return to the comfort of his luxurious penthouse. It was then that a tiny figure emerged from the shadows of a narrow alleyway. The 4-year-old street kid was so small and fragile that she looked barely 2. Her bare feet made hardly a sound on the dirty ground as she approached, her large, dark eyes fixed on the millionaire's face with an intensity unsettling for someone so young. "Your brother is alive," she whispered, her words cutting through the street noise like a sharp blade. The entrepreneur froze, the food basket slipping from his hands and crashing to the ground. For his entire life, he had believed he was an only child, raised by his strict grandmother after losing his parents as an infant. The stern woman who raised him had always been clear about it. He was all that remained of the family, the sole heir to a fortune built with sacrifice and determination. "What did you say?" he murmured, crouching down to be at the child's level. The little girl pointed to the deepest shadows of the alley, where the buildings were piled up chaotically. "He's there. He's been waiting for you for a long time." The millionaire's heart pounded as a ragged figure slowly emerged from the darkness. The homeless man walked with uncertain steps, his long, tangled hair partially covering a face marked by time and suffering. His clothes were in tatters, and the acrid smell emanating from him made people instinctively recoil. But it was his eyes that made the entrepreneur step back. Those eyes carried the same piercing intensity that he saw in the mirror every morning, the same dark, deep color that his grandmother had always said he inherited from his father. Who are you?" the millionaire asked, his voice trembling slightly. The ragged man stopped a few feet away and began to mutter incomprehensible numbers, his hands making erratic gestures in the air. 7, 9, 2, Flower Street, 15, 21, the lady in blue. 3, 8, 5. The entrepreneur frowned, trying to make sense of this seemingly random sequence of words and numbers. The man clearly had severe mental problems, having lived on the streets for years without being able to form coherent sentences. "He's trying to tell you about the garden," explained the little girl, her soft voice contrasting with the bizarre situation. "The garden of the house where you used to play when you were little. 7 red rose bushes, 9 yellow, 2 white. Flower Street was where your grandmother bought the bulbs every spring." The millionaire's blood ran cold. That garden had really existed. He had remembered those rose bushes in fragmented childhood dreams, but he had always believed that they were just fantasies of a creative mind. His grandmother had never mentioned any garden, only talked about how she had struggled to give her orphaned grandson a decent life. "The lady in blue," continued the girl, translating the man's seemingly nonsensical words, "was the maid who took care of you. She always wore blue dresses and sang that song about little birds." A vague memory surfaced in the entrepreneur's mind, the distorted image of a gentle woman humming soft melodies. But how could this child know this? How could this disturbed man hold memories that even he himself could not fully access? 15, 21, repeated the homeless man, his eyes fixed on the millionaire's face with painful recognition. The age you were when you were separated, the girl translated again. 15 and 21. You were the younger one. This is impossible, the entrepreneur murmured, taking another step back. My grandmother told me that I was only a few months old when my parents died. She raised me since I was a baby. The girl tilted her head as if she were hearing something that no one else could hear. He says you had a brown teddy bear. You called him Chocolate because he was the color of your favorite candy. The world seemed to spin around the millionaire. That teddy bear had existed. He vaguely remembered hugging it during nights of nightmares, but he had always believed that it was just any toy that his grandmother had bought. How do you know these things? He asked, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. Because I take care of him, the girl replied simply, placing her small hand in the homeless man's dirty hand. And he remembers everything, even when the words come out confused. The entrepreneur watched the strange connection between the orphaned child and the disturbed man. There was something there that defied any logical explanation, a communication that transcended words and was based on something much deeper. 385, repeated the man, his tears beginning to run down his dirty face. The number of the house where you lived before, explained the girl, on the street that no longer exists. He never forgot. The millionaire felt his legs weaken. His entire life had been built on a lie. The woman he respected as a mother had deliberately hidden the existence of a brother, erasing from the family history someone who clearly loved him and remembered him with disturbing precision. Why did she do this? He whispered, more to himself than to the others. The girl exchanged a meaningful look with the homeless man, as if they shared secrets that even they did not fully understand. Some people do bad things thinking they are protecting those they love, she said, her maturity frightening for someone so young. But the truth always finds a way to come back. The sun began to set, painting the inner city sky with orange tones that contrasted with the harshness of that revelation. The entrepreneur knew that his life would never be the same. Everything he believed about his origin, about his family, about himself, had crumbled in a matter of minutes. And when he looked again at those eyes that mirrored his own, he knew that there was no way to turn his back on that truth, no matter how painful it was. 2 weeks had passed since the encounter in the alley, and the entrepreneur couldn't get those images out of his head. Sitting in his glass office on the top floor of the most expensive commercial building in the city, he stared out the window without really seeing the urban landscape that stretched out before him. His stock investment company had had another profitable day on the stock market, but the numbers on his screen seemed insignificant compared to the revelations that tormented his mind. His secretary had cancelled 3 important meetings that morning after he arrived visibly disturbed at work. His meticulous routine of reviewing financial reports and analyzing investment opportunities had been replaced by obsessive research on birth records and hospital archives from the 90s. The intercom rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Sir, your fiancée is here to see you," announced the secretary in her usual professional voice. The daughter of the influential politician entered the office with the calculated elegance of someone who grew up under the spotlight of high society. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her designer dress complemented the imported shoes that cost more than many people earned in a month. She had been the perfect choice to consolidate his ultimate social rise, an alliance that would guarantee valuable political connections and expand his financial empire. "You've been different these last few weeks," she said, sitting in the leather armchair in front of the desk, distant, lost in thought. "The journalists are starting to ask if our ceremony is really going to happen." The millionaire looked away, unable to face the blue eyes that had always been calculating behind the superficial beauty. "I've been dealing with some complex personal matters." "What kind of matters?" she insisted, crossing her legs in a studied movement. "You know we can solve any problem together." "My father has contacts in all the important areas of the city. It's not something your father can solve," he murmured, looking back out the window. Her expression hardened slightly. The wedding had been planned as a mutually beneficial transaction. He would gain access to the region's most exclusive political circle, while she would become the wife of one of the richest and most coveted men in the metropolis. Love had never been part of the equation, but now he questioned whether that charade was worth the sacrifices required. "All right, I won't push it now," she said, getting up with a calculated sigh. "But I hope you resolve this existential crisis soon. We have a reputation to maintain." After she left, the entrepreneur remained alone in the office until nightfall. As the employees began to leave, he made a decision that he knew was reckless. He exchanged his Italian suit for simpler clothes and drove his imported car through the increasingly deteriorated streets of the inner city. The alley was plunged into darkness when he arrived, illuminated only by a faulty lamppost that flickered intermittently. The street kid was sitting on the dirty ground, sharing a piece of bread with the homeless man she called his brother. Both looked up when they heard the approaching footsteps. "You came back," said the girl without showing surprise. "He said you would." The homeless man raised his head, and even in the dim light the entrepreneur could distinguish those familiar eyes. 12, 15, 8, he murmured, pointing to the millionaire. "The day, the month, and the hour you were born," the child translated. "He was there when you came into the world, held you in his arms before your mother even did." A wave of unexpected emotion swept through the entrepreneur's chest. Throughout his life, he had imagined what it would be like to have an older brother, someone who would protect him and share family memories. Discovering that this person had existed all along, living on the streets while he accumulated wealth and assets, was too cruel an irony to process. "Why did my grandmother do this to him?" he asked, crouching down to the level of the two. The girl hesitated for the first time since they met. "There are things that we still don't fully understand." He remembers fragments, pieces of conversations, but the memories are confused. 2763, said the homeless man, his hands trembling slightly. "Numbers of a clinic," explained the girl, her voice becoming more cautious. "A place where they took you when you were little." The entrepreneur felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of clinic?" "He can't explain it right. The memories make him very agitated." The child placed her hand on the man's arm, calming him instantly. "But there is one person who can help us understand." "Who?" "The nurse who raised me before she went to a better place. She worked at that clinic a long time ago. She was the one who taught me to understand his language." For the next 2 hours, sitting on the cold floor of the alley, the millionaire heard fragments of a story that defied everything he believed about his childhood. The retired nurse had spent decades trying to find the children who were subjected to experimental treatments in a private clinic that operated in the 90s. "She said your grandmother received a lot of money to allow them to do tests on you," said the girl, her voice low and careful. "New medicines, injections that were supposed to improve children's intelligence." "This is absurd," protested the entrepreneur, but his voice sounded less convincing than he would have liked. "The tests worked on you," she continued. "Your memory became sharper. Your ability to learn increased. That's why you can earn so much money investing in complex businesses." The homeless man began to rock his body back and forth, muttering numbers faster and faster. The growing agitation worried the girl, who hugged him with surprising tenderness for someone so young. "But with him it was different," she whispered. "The injections caused problems." His mind became confused, his words scrambled. "Your grandmother was afraid and asked for him to be placed in a place far away." "For how long?" asked the millionaire. although he feared the answer. 15 years. He ran away when he could, but he no longer knew how to find you. Until now. The entrepreneur looked at the brother he had lost without knowing he existed, seeing beyond the deteriorated appearance the face that could have been his lifelong companion. Guilt hit him like an avalanche, mixed with a growing anger against the woman who had built his family fortune on such a devastating lie. "Where is this nurse now?" he asked, his voice full of determination. The girl lowered her eyes, and for the first time since they met, he saw tears welling up. "She passed away last month, but she left some papers hidden in the place where we used to live together." "What kind of papers?" "Names of other children who went through the same tests. Addresses of doctors. And most importantly," she paused, swallowing the sob, "documents that prove your grandmother knew exactly what was happening." That night, the millionaire returned to his luxurious apartment with his mind in turmoil. Sitting in his imported leather armchair, staring at the expensive artwork that adorned the walls, he began to question whether all his wealth wasn't tainted by the blood of an unforgivable family betrayal. His phone rang insistently. It was his fiancée, probably wanting to know where he had spent the night, but he couldn't answer it. How could he explain that he had discovered he had a brother living as a homeless man? How could he admit that his family fortune might have been built on the suffering of the person he should have protected? When he finally fell asleep, his dreams were populated by images of 2 children playing in a garden full of rose bushes, oblivious to the cruel fate that a selfish adult decision was about to seal forever. 3 months had passed since the first visit to the alley, and the entrepreneur's life had turned into a devastating, emotional roller coaster. His days were now divided between increasingly tense business meetings and secret visits to the place where his brother lived with the street kid. The contrast between the two worlds was slowly consuming him, creating fissures in a personality that had always prided itself on being controlled and rational. That Thursday morning, he arrived at the office to find 3 important executives waiting in his conference room with somber expressions. His CFO, a meticulous man who managed millions in assets, held a folder full of documents that clearly contained bad news. "We lost the contract with the city's construction firm," he announced bluntly. $2 million in investments that we expected to recover in the next 6 months. "How did we lose it?" the millionaire asked, trying to focus on the professional problems while his mind was still processing the previous night's conversation with his brother. "They cited irregularities in our documentation. Nothing specific, just a general policy review." The CFO hesitated before continuing. "We've also received notification that 3 major investors are withdrawing their capital from our funds." The entrepreneur felt a chill in his stomach. His businesses had always been conducted with absolute transparency, each transaction meticulously documented to avoid any legal questioning. The family business had been built on a solid reputation that had taken decades to establish. "There's more," continued the CFO, his voice becoming even more tense. "The main bank is requesting a complete audit of our investments in cryptocurrencies and international ventures." "Why now?" the millionaire murmured, although a terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. In the following days, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Contracts that seemed guaranteed were cancelled without convincing explanations. Investors who had maintained profitable partnerships for years began to back away, citing vague concerns about the direction of the company. It was as if an invisible force was systematically sabotaging everything he had built. The professional pressure intensified when his fiancée scheduled an urgent meeting at a fancy restaurant in the financial district. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a red dress that cost more than many people earned in a year, but her expression was far from friendly. "I need to know where you've been spending your nights," she said, dispensing with any preliminary conversation. "My father is receiving embarrassing questions about your recent behavior." The entrepreneur took a sip of the expensive wine, buying time to formulate an answer. I've been dealing with complex family issues. What family issues? You always said you had no family left alive. She leaned over the table, her voice low but threatening. I hired a private investigator. His blood ran cold. You did what? I found out that you've been visiting the inner city regularly, a specific alley where you apparently meet a woman. She paused, savoring the moment. I imagine how the press would react to learning that the city's most eligible millionaire is keeping a mistress in such deplorable conditions. It's not what you're thinking, he protested, but he knew that any explanation about the truth would sound even more absurd. Then, explain it to me. Now. The entrepreneur looked at the woman he was supposed to marry in a few months, seeing for the first time the calculated cruelty that had always existed behind the superficial beauty. She wasn't worried about him or their relationship. She was protecting her own image and her family's political ambitions. Some situations are too complicated to explain in a few words, he said finally. You have 1 week to resolve this, she declared, rising from the table, or I myself will make public the photographs that my investigator collected. That night, desperate for answers that could explain the mysterious financial crisis, the millionaire returned to the alley more determined than ever. The girl was waiting for him, with a yellowed envelope in her hands, while his brother drew numbers in the dirt with a stick. I managed to recover some papers from the nurse, she said, handing him the envelope. She hid everything in a box under the bed. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and found documents that confirmed his worst fears. There were contracts signed by his grandmother, authorizing experimental treatments on 2 children in exchange for a substantial amount of money. The amount mentioned was exactly the initial capital that his grandmother had always said she had inherited from a distant uncle. 4789, murmured his brother, pointing to one of the papers. The numbers of the medical record, the girl translated. They kept detailed records of everything. The entrepreneur continued reading, discovering names of doctors and executives who now held important positions in large corporations in the city. One name in particular made him gasp. The current director of the bank that was auditing his company had been one of the main people responsible for the illegal experiments 3 decades ago. That's why my businesses are being sabotaged, he whispered, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together in a terrifying way. They found out I'm investigating the past. The nurse said that some of those responsible have become very powerful people, confirmed the girl, and that they would do anything to keep the secrets buried. During the following weeks, the situation became desperate. His company lost 2 more important contracts, forcing him to fire loyal employees who had worked for him for years. His stock investments plummeted mysteriously, as if someone was manipulating the market against him. The wealth he had spent a lifetime building was dissolving before his eyes. Worse still, he began to spend a large part of his remaining wealth trying to provide adequate medical care for his brother. Private clinics charged fortunes for experimental treatments that promised to reverse the neurological damage caused by the childhood tests. Each consultation cost the equivalent of what many people earned in months, but he was willing to sacrifice everything to try to repair the mistakes of the past. The girl accompanied all the medical appointments, serving as an interpreter between the disturbed brother and the specialists. Her surprising intelligence impressed the doctors, who couldn't understand how such a young child understood complex neurological concepts with such ease. She's special, commented one of the neurologists after a particularly difficult examination. I've never seen such a strong connection between 2 people with such different backgrounds. It was during one of those consultations that the entrepreneur discovered something that changed his perspective on the girl. A routine blood test revealed unusual genetic markers, suggesting that she had also been subjected to some type of experimental treatment during early childhood. The nurse never told you this? He asked, showing the results to the child. She said I was special, but she never explained why, replied the girl, her maturity haunted by moments of childlike vulnerability. "She only said that my mother had worked at the clinic and that something terrible happened to her. Your mother was there when they did the tests on us. She was a nurse. She tried to protect the children, but—" The girl hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. "The doctors did bad things to her too." That night, the millionaire returned to his apartment to find his fiancée waiting with a suitcase in her hand and an expression of contained fury. She had discovered about the exorbitant spending at medical clinics and misinterpreted it as evidence of an extramarital affair even more serious than she had imagined. "You've spent more than $2 million on medical treatments in the last 2 months, she accused, throwing bank statements on the coffee table. "For whom? For your secret mistress who is sick." "It's not that," he tried to explain, but he knew that the truth would sound even more absurd. "I don't care anymore what it is," she declared, heading for the door. "Our engagement is over, and when I tell my father about your financial problems, you'll find out how difficult it is to do business in this city without the right connections." The door slammed shut, leaving him alone in the wreckage of a life he thought he had under control. His company was on the verge of bankruptcy. His engagement had ended in scandal, and he was rapidly consuming the last resources trying to save a brother who might never be completely healed. But when he looked out the window towards the inner city, where a brave girl was taking care of a broken man, he knew that there was no choice but to continue fighting against forces much greater than him, even if it cost him everything he possessed. 8 months had passed since that first meeting in the alley, and the entrepreneur was financially ruined. His company had filed for bankruptcy the previous week, forcing him to sell his luxurious penthouse and most of his assets to pay off accumulated debts. Now he lived in a small rented apartment in the inner city, ironically just a few blocks from the alley where it had all begun. On that rainy Monday morning, he walked through the wet streets carrying a backpack with the last documents he had managed to save from the company. Inside, it were all the papers that the nurse had left, along with new documents that he himself had collected during months of stubborn investigation. The truth about the experiments was finally taking shape, but the price of discovering it had been devastating. Upon arriving at the alley, he found a scene that surprised him. His brother was sitting on the ground, but for the first time in all those months, his eyes seemed focused and lucid. The girl was next to him, holding his hand with her usual tenderness. But there was something different in the atmosphere of that place. "He had a crisis during the early morning," explained the child when she saw him approaching. But this time it was different. The words began to come out clearer. The homeless man raised his eyes and for the first time spoke a complete sentence. "I pretended to be more confused than I really was." The entrepreneur froze, the backpack slipping from his shoulders. "What did you say?" "During all these years, I pretended that my mind was more damaged than it really was," repeated his brother, his voice hoarse but perfectly understandable. "It was the only way to protect myself from them." "From them?" "From whom?" "The same men who are now destroying your life." The brother stood up slowly, revealing a posture more erect than he had ever shown. "They were looking for me regularly, trying to find out how much I remembered about the experiments." The girl smiled for the first time in weeks, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. He was waiting for the right moment to tell the truth. "When you were ready to hear everything." "But why now?" asked the entrepreneur, still processing the shocking revelation. "Because you've proven that you're willing to sacrifice everything to help me," replied the brother, wiping his dirty face with his trembling hands. "And because I discovered something that can destroy the men who did us wrong." During the next few hours, sitting on the cold floor of the alley, while the rain created a curtain of privacy around them, the older brother told a story that completely transformed the entrepreneur's understanding of his past. "I was 15 when the tests began," he explained, his voice gaining strength as the words flowed. "You were 8. Our grandmother had been convinced that the experiments would make us smarter, more capable of succeeding in life. "The tests worked on me," murmured the entrepreneur. "They worked on both of us, but in different ways." The brother pointed to the girl. "She's not just an orphan who found me by chance. She's the daughter of the nurse who tried to protect us." The child lowered her eyes, finally revealing a secret that she had carried alone for months. "My mother's name was Antonia. She worked at the clinic and discovered that the doctors were doing illegal tests on children. When she tried to report what was happening," continued the brother, "they experimented on her too. Injections that affected her mind, caused severe neurological problems." "And you?" asked the entrepreneur, looking at the girl with growing understanding. "I was born already affected by the chemicals that ran in my mother's blood," she admitted. "That's why I can understand minds that have been damaged in the same way. It's as if I can hear the thoughts that have been scrambled." The entrepreneur felt an overwhelming wave of emotion. That brave child was not just a random interpreter. She was a survivor of the same crimes that had destroyed his family, carrying alone a burden that no child should know. "There's more," said the brother, pulling a package wrapped in plastic from inside his ragged clothes. "During all these years living on the streets, I've collected evidence. Photographs, documents, recordings of conversations that I heard when they thought I was unable to understand. Inside the package were dozens of documents that proved not only the extent of the illegal experiments, but also the names of all those involved who now held positions of power in the city. Among them were the bank director, 2 executives from major construction firms, and a politician who had run for mayor in the last election. "Why did you keep all this a secret?" the entrepreneur asked, leafing through the evidence with trembling hands. "Because alone I had no credibility, a disturbed homeless guy talking about conspiracies." The brother smiled sadly. "But you have education, resources, knowledge of how the business world works. Together, we can bring the truth to light." At that moment, the girl approached and embraced the 2 men, creating a circle of mutual protection that transcended any traditional blood ties. "My mother always said that one day we would find a way to get justice for the children who suffered," she whispered. "But even with this evidence, how are we going to face such powerful people?" the entrepreneur questioned. "With the help of other survivors," replied the brother. "The nurse who raised our little interpreter left a list with names and addresses of other victims of the experiments. Some have become successful adults, others struggle with mental problems, but they all have one thing in common: they want justice." During the following weeks, the 3 became an unlikely family, working together to locate and organize other survivors of the experiments. The entrepreneur used his management skills to coordinate the group, while his brother provided crucial details that only someone who had lived on the streets could have collected. The girl served as an emotional bridge between everyone, her unique ability to understand traumatized minds being essential to convincing other survivors to join the cause. The small apartment that the entrepreneur had rented turned into a makeshift command center, with maps, photographs, and documents scattered across every available surface. For the first time in months, he felt useful again, using his intelligence enhanced by the experiments for a cause greater than personal profit. The final breakthrough came when they discovered that one of the survivors had become a respected investigative journalist, with access to major news outlets. Another had become a lawyer, specializing in human rights, with experience in cases of medical corruption. "We don't have to fight this battle alone," realized the entrepreneur during a late-night meeting in his apartment. "We have a network of people who have been strengthened by the same traumas that separate us." On the day they finally took the evidence to the authorities, the 3 walked together through the streets of the city, no longer as a millionaire, a homeless man, and an orphan, but as a family forged by shared pain and the determination to transform suffering into justice. The legal process would be long and complex, but for the first time in months, the entrepreneur felt genuine hope. He had lost his fortune, his company, his material possessions, and even his social identity. But he had gained something much more valuable: a true family and a purpose that transcended any investment in stocks or financial holdings. Sitting on a park bench at the end of that historic day, watching the sunset paint the metropolis sky, the three knew that the journey was just beginning. But now they would face the challenges together, united by bonds that no adversity could break, proving that sometimes the greatest riches cannot be measured in dollars or net worth, but in the courage to fight for the truth and in the strength that comes from never abandoning those we love, regardless of the price we have to pay for that loyalty.